these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths
with Dan Crenshaw.
Hey, we're coming to you from Egypt, not live, but, close to it enough. I'm here with my friends from the U.S. Congress, of course, U.S. House of Representatives, and we're here at COP27. COP27 is, of course, the UN's annual climate change conference, or whatever it is they do here. We're going to talk about what exactly that is. But there's a lot of takeaways, a lot of interesting discussions that have happened the last couple days in the beautiful scenery of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. So can we go down the line and introduce everybody? Greg, you want to start? What district you represent? And we'll not do takeaways yet. Let's just say who we are.
I'm Greg Murphy. I represent North Carolina's 3rd Congressional District.
Garret Graves from South Louisiana.
Mariannette Miller-Meeks. I now represent Iowa's 1st Congressional District.
John Curtis, Utah's 3rd.
Tim Walberg, Michigan's 7th.
All right, so that's everybody. And of course, Garret, you're one of our all-stars here, of course. You led the task force on what the Republican plan is under the Commitment to America, to energy, to environment. What's our response to the Green New Deal? You've led that task force exceedingly well. John, head of the Conservative Climate Caucus, and which is the second biggest caucus in the Republican side, actually, which is very impressive. So I just wanted to highlight both of you first, but maybe we should explain to whoever's watching this what COP27 actually is. What they even do here. Who wants to take that one?
Sure. So the COP is it's the Convention of Parties, and this is the 27th meeting of all of countries from around the world, and they sit down and negotiate different agreements related to energy, climate, and especially emissions reduction. And I want to highlight what I just said. This is the 27th meeting, and global emissions are still going up. And so, I think a way to summarize this is it's a failure. It's a failure to have 27 different meetings that continue to have emissions going up, and then looking specifically in the United States, where emissions aren't just going up, but we're also seeing prices go up to where cost of living is unaffordable because of energy policies out of the Biden administration, and we're becoming more dependent on other countries to supply our energy.
Yeah, and the question is why that's happening. And one of the reasons we come here, because everybody here is a Republican, and we have a Republican base that might say, why are you going to this globalist meeting, guy? This is why are you cohorting with the likes of these people? And I would say the answer is because, well, you better be happy that people like us are here, because we're the only ones, I think, offering what is a different point of view, this sort of rational environmentalism, where, look, you can accept that we should have cleaner energy and lower emissions to mitigate whatever the potential effects of those things are on the climate. But we also have to accept another necessity, which is energy security, which I think we all define as energy you can rely on, that turns on when you want it to turn on, at a price that you can generally accept and also predict throughout the year, right? Just the basics. And we're like the only ones talking that way. But in meetings, do you hear others talking that way? I mean, what's some general perceptions from, some of the delegations we've met with, some of the people we've seen, some of the heads maybe nodding as we were saying things at the panel when we were there yesterday? Is there a sense that maybe there's more of a hunger for rational environmentalism given some of the world events recently?
Yeah, I'll weigh in on that. And I think what's happened in Ukraine is the perfect example of where we are headed as the United States and what will happen if we don't change our policies. And the reality of it is we've been told that we have to sacrifice national security. We have to sacrifice low affordable rates and reliability. Also, we can reduce emissions. And to your point, why we're here is we bring the message of, look, we can have independence, we can have affordable, reliable prices, and we can reduce emissions. And I think Republicans have a plan to do that doesn't put us where Europe is today.
Okay, so what's that plan? Garret made the plan.
Sure. So bottom line is that I think you've got to look at an energy strategy kind of like you'd look at a business plan. You figure out what are your assets and your strengths, what resources do you have, and you develop a business plan based on that, which in the United States, look, there's no question we have a lot of the critical minerals that you need to produce renewable energy technologies like solar and wind and battery storage and things along those lines. But we're not mining them because this administration has been blocking the mining and even shutting down mining operations in some states. So you can't even develop or become energy secure, as Dan said, because you're not allowing that production to happen in the United States. Now, the other thing we have an abundance of is oil and gas. And we're watching this administration block or shut down or prevent energy production, oil and gas production in the United States at a level that we haven't seen since the 1940s. You'd have to go back to the Truman administration. And while I've never heard anybody say, gosh, I wish Jimmy Carter were president, when Carter was president, they leased 100 times more acres of lands and waters for energy production than we're seeing right now. So what our plan does is it's things like unlocking those resources to where we can once again, and I'm going to reiterate that, once again, become energy independent, energy secure. It is things like permitting reform to where you can actually go out and build things like pipelines, renewable energy projects, transmission to actually transmit the new electricity. It's things like beating Russia and China, ensuring that our strategy is dependent upon our own resources and those of our allies, and not hitching our wagon to those countries that largely have different values and different interests than we do in the United States. It's things like ensuring we rely upon American innovation, the country that has the National Energy Labs, that is the creator of all of this new technology that can take us next level on both energy affordability and on lowering emissions. So it's all about a U.S.-based strategy to lower emissions, to ensure we have a competitive economy and we have affordable energy.
You know, ironically, it's the Democrats' favored environmental regulations that ultimately prevent them from building out this utopia of solar and wind infrastructure that they want. You know, they seem to have this problem where they want this dream, but they don't want the things that are needed to create the dream. They'd rather, say, import solar panels from China, not worry about how those things are made or what kind of environmental standards occur there, or even what kind of emissions are required to do all of the massive amount of both mineral extraction and processing and development and shipping. None of that gets included in the carbon footprint, of course. And, you know, just so much hypocrisy. I think that's why we come here. We get a little frustrated because there's a ton of like do-gooder mentality, right?
Feel good.
Yeah. And sorry. Feel good. That's
signaling.
Well, that's an important correction, actually, because do-gooder would actually imply that they're doing something good. As Garret pointed out, there's nothing good actually happening. It's just feel good. And we're here with some actual solutions.
Well, what I thought was interesting is that in a lot of our meetings, they did bring up affordability, and they did bring up what's happening in Europe with prices. But at the same point in time, they don't want to let go of what they've done that led to high prices.
And
it's beyond the war in Ukraine. But so I think there is an acknowledgement that affordable energy is important, that it's necessary, and what they're looking at is other ways to mitigate that, whether that's giving subsidies, as some of the countries are doing, or whether that's giving a tax credit. But it's certainly not bringing online affordable sources of energy or, LNG, stations where you can import.
What did you think about when we met with the European Minister of Climate? And he pointed out that as a result of what they were doing relatively to reducing what the European Union citizens were expending, he talked about the 15% reduction in the use of gas and power during this time when, of course, the Ukraine war is going on. And they got caught with buying Russian gas, Russian energy. And now they're excited about the fact of 15% reduction. Why? Because they turned their thermostats down.
Yeah. Showered less.
Right.
Now, if you're talking about enjoying life, that's not enjoying life, and that's not what America needs to do. We're innovators,
right? And
we want to keep progressing forward. So it was interesting to hear that.
It's still a rosy picture. There's no admission of that this can't be good for you.
No, I think Tim's point is great, and I apologize, John. And that is, they're having people adjust down their lifestyle. So all of this progression over a century, instead of enjoying what has been created and developed and progressed, we're going to go backwards and do without and sacrifice. So we're not going to reduce the price. We're just going to have you use less.
We're not going to have nuclear power. We're not going to do what might work. We're going to turn our thermostats down and take less showers.
So less energy. And if you're using less, it'll cost you less.
John, what were you saying?
Yeah, Tim and I happened to be in Europe several days before the war broke out, while the war broke out, and several days after the war broke out. And we were invited over there by the European Union to show off what they were doing on climate. And what we actually saw was all the mistakes, right, that they had made. And they were confronted with those almost overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And two things, that's the trajectory we're on as a country right now, which is why our voice is so needed. But the second thing is what we heard over there was a doubling down of saying, I told you we should have done more renewables.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Well, our administration was saying this crap too. It didn't make any sense. I mean, they've been saying it for the past year as this war has been going on. This is just goes to show, see how high these prices are. Just goes to show if everybody had electric cars, things would be fine. But if it's like,
it's the lesson in hypocrisy. It's actually, in my opinion, the lesson in making you feel good but not thinking about the consequences, which seems to be a lot of what the Democratic mantra as far as decision making seems to be. If you think about, well, it makes me feel good, but you don't think about the secondary, tertiary consequences, it's bad. If I can, Dan, I'll speak again why we're here, because I think a lot of people say, why are Republicans showing up for this? We're showing up to kind of draw a line in the sand in some ways to say, let's do rational thought. And I think so much of this, we've had so many discussions about China. And, the U.S. signed the Paris Accord, and then Trump came out, and then Biden, of course, was happy to jump back in it. But one of the things, that I've learned personally is we've given so much economic advantage to China that we're now fighting them militarily, economically, internationally as far as strategy. And here we are woohooing how great we're cutting emissions in our own lifestyles to that point. But China at the same time is continuing to get an out. They're building more coal plants today, and they're actually going to get an out for more than another decade. So we're doing the hard work, cutting our own throats, if we will, economically, and they're blossoming. And so it puts us at a marked disadvantage. And I think that was the reluctance of the Trump administration really against this thing. It wasn't about trying to cut emissions, really, more. It was just how that accord put us at an economic disadvantage.
And a national security advantage.
Absolutely.
Disadvantage.
Yeah. Then the Taiwan, we met with the Taiwanese as well, and they were on board with, I think, much more of a rational environmentalist approach. Their science and technology head of that delegation, she was telling me how, yes, we've done the calculations, and it makes more sense to go carbon capture, nuclear, just as a cost-benefit analysis of what, if you're going to meet these goals. There's another Princeton study, if you don't believe their calculations, you can look at Princeton doing another study that shows the exact same thing. There's a way to do this that makes sense, that kind of gives us the things we want, which is, again, energy security and reliability. And there's a way to do it that just doesn't make sense. And it sounds like the Europeans, I wasn't in that meeting, but it sounds like the Europeans are still moving headlong into that realm. I heard the Japanese are also a little bit more on the rational environmentalist side, I think. What other countries did we talk to, and what are our perceptions?
Japan, unlike Australia, which says no nuclear, Japan seemingly is now, despite the Fukushima accident, is now coming more and more back online, understanding that is part of the puzzle. Because I really think, and this is one of the things that we've had discussions about this whole time, it's a puzzle. You have to have carbon capture if you want to cut emissions. You have to still understand that oil and gas are going to be part of our future. They're inextricably aligned with our future, and there's so many different things that we have to put together. But if you're going to have nations that swear off nuclear, it's still not going to. We can't put that puzzle together.
What was their reasoning? What was the Australians' reasoning for that?
The people.
People.
Yeah.
The people.
They're afraid of it. Yeah, And there's some of that in the United States, right? This reluctancy based on safety or storage. But most of that is based on a view of nuclear, which was our grandparents' nuclear, right? Not new nuclear.
The proliferation, weaponized
Exactly.
type of nuclear. I mean, but it's up to leaders to actually,
To
correct those notions. I think there's been a lot of work in the U.S. to correct those notions. I know I haven't done any polling recently, but I'm not so sure people really think about it very much or are very much against it. The Taiwanese told us how many problems they're having with it locally. They have these like local elections that then decide to shut these things down. So that's, I guess it seems much more poignant as a problem for them than it does for us. But
but that's true. I mean, when
Go ahead.
when they said when we were told that, well, it's the people, and I'm glad you said, because to me it's like, well, that's what leaders have to do. You have to explain, rationally, all the risks and the benefits, and you don't have that. And I think that we're trying to do that with nuclear. And I think we've done a good job. But I think even more than that is the situation in Ukraine, where it's very apparent to people that with renewables like wind and solar, you don't produce enough electricity for today's needs, even if you had battery storage, especially if you want to throw in the transportation sector. But you especially don't for increasing needs. And in Iowa, as I say to people, we have 50% of our energy from renewables, 50% of our electricity from wind. We export energy, but there's fatigue. People don't want more windmills and they don't want more solar panels. We're seeing large acreage now solar panels, and I think, Greg, you said
North Carolina's number 2 in the country in that because of subsidies years
and so there's going to be a people backlash against those types of renewables as well. I think
it's like off the coast of Cape Cod, ironically.
Isn't that right? Yeah. And it's to your point, when you use the word radical environmentalist versus rational, it's their own far left that's actually crippling so much of their mantra. So.
Well, and there's a lot of other discussions. I'm not sure we had them a lot here this weekend, but they're things we talk about all the time, which is, the real footprint of solar and wind. I've personally just become less and less supportive of solar and wind over time as I learn more about the actual carbon footprint and then what it does to a grid. I mean, any grid expert will tell you it's almost impossible to really operate a grid off solar and wind. It's the higher percentage mix it gets, the harder it is to operate that grid because of the variability. And it also makes it more expensive because that variability has to be backed up by an actual baseload energy, which then has to run by its very nature inefficiently because you have to ramp it up and down. So costs go up. This isn't rocket science. Well, it's kind of close to it, I guess. But the footprints, and a lot more data is coming out on this. Where I on this podcast interviewed a researcher at Rice University, and she's like, as we crunch the numbers, and the numbers are new, this data hasn't been out. You might be able to argue at a certain point that solar and wind has a bigger carbon footprint than gas, just because of how it's made and what's required to do it. The amount of excavation of earth, it's like 10 times more material needed, 100 times more land space, like 200 times more land space for wind. And so, as far as effects on the earth, this stuff has to be taken into account also. Maybe it still makes sense in a lot of places. I think wind makes sense in West Texas, but to what extent? There's got to be a limit to that before it crushes our grid.
To that point, there's also the argument, and I would like personally do a lot more research in this. There's also the argument that in some instances, wind actually raises temperature, brings down hotter air, or generates or changes microenvironments. So at least I've been reading a couple papers on that.
I don't think about that. I know it kills birds.
It does kill birds.
Trump
Trump
calls them the bird graveyards. Bird graveyards.
I wouldn't want anybody to listen to this and feel like we're against wind and solar, or we're against all these things. And
we're against the irrational subsidization of it.
And we've also talked a lot about fossil fuels here, and I've heard Garret talk a little bit about why we can use fossil fuels to actually reduce emissions. And I think that would be an important point to make in this podcast is when we're talking about fossil fuels, we're not drill baby drill. We're actually talking about reducing emissions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things we've got to do is make sure that we use the evidence that's occurred in the United States, but also lessons learned from individual states that have taken different paths or other countries. And in the United States, we've led the world in reducing emissions. We've led the world, not 1 year, but about over a 17-year period. In fact, reducing emissions more than the next 7 emissions-reducing countries combined. The biggest contribution to that reduction in emissions is our transition to natural gas, going from dirtier fuel sources to natural gas. Now, the thing is that we've gotten even better and cleaner at using natural gas. And we now have complementary technologies where you can effectively make natural gas indistinguishable from any other renewable from an emissions perspective. And so we've got to recognize that you're going to have a surge in global energy demand. Even the Biden administration predicts it's going to be a 50% increase in global energy demand. So take all the energy being produced around the globe today and increase it by another 50% just in the next 28 years. So we need every source we can get. And if we can use natural gas, something that's abundant in Louisiana, Texas, and other states, and we can do it in a way that continues this downward trajectory of reducing emissions, why in the world would we not do that? Now, conversely, we can go down a path like was discussed with the European Union, where you're seeing prices skyrocket, reliability plummet, energy security plummet. You can go down a path like California. Electricity prices double that of my home state, 8th worst emissions growth in America, most dependent state upon foreign energy, least reliable grid. You saw recently where they told people they couldn't plug in their cars. And you've got people leaving California and going to Texas. I mean, so why in the world would you want to replicate that or force it upon the other 49 states? We would be foolish to follow those pathways. So we've got to double and triple down on those very strategies that have worked, which means truly all of the above energy strategy. And as Dan said, making sure that we're using the right technologies in the right places.
We can actually make that argument with data. I mean, I say this all the time, and Toby Rice from EQT Energy had this whole study done. And, you know, the logic goes as such. If you let the industry build pipelines, build the export terminals they need, really let them do what they need to do, they could probably quadruple exports of gas in the next decade. If you also had the U.S. government coming to COP27 and COP28 and COP29 and asking other developing countries to buy our gas and displace their coal with that, right? If you had a concerted government efforts, because that's a big if, right? But the assumption is, and the calculation goes as such, the assumption is that gas being exported displaces coal. All right, so you're reducing, which is how we reduced our emissions so much. Our gas displaced coal. If you did that, it would have the equivalent emissions reduction of giving everyone in America solar panels on their home, giving everyone in America an electric vehicle, and doubling our wind capacity. That's an astounding set of facts, and they are facts. And so, but we're not doing that. Our government is not doing that at COP 26, 27, 28. They're just coming up here and everybody's doing the feel-good thing. And it's nonsensical.
But Dan, going back to your first question of why we're here, that's exactly why it is. You know, when Greg and I had a chance to sit out in the audience and watch you that had been here last year talk in the panel and get information out that was clearly not being told just really a few minutes later by our president speaking to the entire group. News media that covered it, what we've seen so far, heard a different story. When we met with the various delegations today, I mean, Taiwan heard support for why we need to keep away from China. When we went to Australia, we gave a chance to talk to them about the fact of there's an allyship that needs to happen. If they're not willing to put up nuclear power, but they have all of these rare earth minerals that they're shipping to China to have it processed and bring it back. They heard today from us saying, hey, why can't we ally around that? Yeah. We'll work together with our people. Then we had the opportunity, which was amazing today, to meet with our climate czar, John Kerry, who didn't invite us, but because we were here, we had an opportunity to have a discussion and hear some of you talk to him clear about truth, truth to power, as it were, and have him say, you know, I appreciate this, and let me meet with you people. This starts to talk, and all of a sudden, what we see coming from the craziness, almost a religion about climate, we get down to reality and talk about the fact of how we clean up unnecessary climate problems, how we use the resources, all of the above, through innovation, get to the best. And we don't know what the best will be in the future, but we will not get to it by cloistering things off. So it was a wonderful experience for conservatives to be here.
Yeah,
and
got to
talk
have a
about
seat
reality.
at the table, right?
Yeah,
You can stay on the sidelines and yell and scream, but you're not going to get anything done. And that's exactly the point, Tim. I think so. Any other takeaways from the John Kerry meeting?
Go for
Garret,
it.
Garret,
We're laughing because
Garret,
we all know what
Garret.
Garret wants to say.
Come on, Garret. Take some credit here. I heard you held him pretty accountable with some facts.
My
Price
blood pressure's
gouging.
down a good 100 points since the meeting. No, look, I just think what's most important in dealing with the administration is that we don't allow them to set false narratives and then act on them.
Yeah.
And so things like saying that there are 9,000 different leases that are out there that could be producing energy today, it's simply not true. Allowing them to sit there and say that they're doing everything they can to ensure we have abundant supplies of energy when, as I mentioned before, you'd have to go back to the Truman administration in the 1940s when energy demand was obviously much lower to find similar levels of energy exploration and production as we're seeing right now. We can't allow them to just tell the public things that simply are they're just not true. And so we did talk a good bit about ensuring that we're aligning facts. And, Tim, you talked about how the press potentially maligned or distorted some of the things that we said. Look, our objectives are affordable energy, clean energy, and energy security. And just to throw out another fact out there, if we were to simply take the gas that Europe had bought from Vladimir Putin for 1 year, and we had replaced it with U.S. gas, that could have reduced 218 million tons of emissions because we have cleaner gas. Not to mention, it is billions of dollars we wouldn't have been handing over to Vladimir Putin in the collective interest of us and our European allies. And so for us to take tools off the table, like natural gas in some cases, it is simply ignorant of facts. It's ignorant of success, world-leading success in reducing emissions. And I just think it's really important, as Dan noted earlier, that we're following facts and data, that we're using the best science to inform decisions. And look, the plan that we released, we're the only ones that actually have a plan. Democrats haven't released a plan. They haven't released the strategy, which is why you're seeing this incoherent energy strategy or policy being put out there that is causing us to have skyrocketing gasoline and utility costs and causing us to become more dependent upon foreign energy sources, while the Biden administration strategy is causing emissions in the United States to go up, not down.
But they did say they had a strategy, even though they didn't articulate the strategy.
They were very clear they had a strategy.
They were
Their
very
strategy
clear
is
they had a
to
strategy.
Subsidize renewables. Again, we're not against renewables, but when they receive, per unit of energy about 250 times more subsidies than say nuclear does, then that's a problem. Now I think that now I have been told that some of the good things in the Inflation Reduction Act didn't reduce inflation, but there are some good things for nuclear energy in there. So I suppose that's good news. But there's still a heck of a lot more for unreliable energy in the form of renewables. And so our question is always, why subsidize the thing that only works when the weather is right for it?
It's shoot, ready, aim.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, putting charging stations around the country is shoot, ready, aim.
Yeah.
We're going to put them around, and then we're going to decide how they impact, right? And how are we going to get electricity to those?
Mm-hmm.
And once we figure out how we're going to get electricity, where's the electricity going to come from to go to those? And those are the questions that we want answered, right? It's not that we are against what they're doing.
Yeah. There's a
We
lot
just
of
want
pieces
this
of the puzzle they do not. They do not.
Or
even,
to Garrett's point, they haven't put together a business plan.
Nope.
No.
They haven't put together any plan. It's a shotgun approach, and who knows what's going to happen? 2 weeks, 2 years, 20 years from now.
And some of the
Well,
most
they-
important people are left off the table. That's the consumer.
Yeah.
Who ends up paying for it.
Yep.
Well, they like to shut down mines too. How many permits for mines have been revoked? I remember in one of the original Build Back Better pieces of legislation, they were going to shut down a copper mine in Arizona, which would have provided like 30% of copper potentially for the United States. I mean, it's stuff like that. They hate mining, right? Because it's like, I don't know. It's some kind of religious feeling about the earth and how.
But
you
it's
must
okay
keep
to
it safe.
shift it to another country.
Yeah.
It
Congo
makes us feel good in the
slave
United
labor.
States.
Yeah.
But don't worry about China, because that's where we're going to get it from.
Yeah.
And if they really care about emissions, which obviously with just when you tell half the truth and the other part's a lie, you're really not getting anywhere. And if you're just basically saying we're shifting everything to China, which we don't care about, but it's going to make us feel better at the same time.
Yeah.
So we need to talk about our success. And again, the numbers that you're putting out, as you discussed today and on that platform yesterday, the numbers say America is succeeding. Unless we get on our own way and do things that don't make sense. We are succeeding. We're showing the world what could be done. Why go backwards?
Something else that's really important. Greg made reference to this earlier. You talk about a business plan. So think about the people that are actually causing either the success in energy policy or the failures. And that is the people that are actually out there in the private sector working, the innovators, the people that are trying to develop the energy solutions. If we're going to sit here and we're going to be in a situation where Biden's going to be president and he's going to do this, and Trump's president and does this, and then whoever's next does this, you're going to have industry that's out there trying to get certainty or predictability. And they're going to be trying to make investment strategies. But you can't do it because government is out there moving the target or moving the goal line on a constant basis. So one of the things that we can do, I think, as policymakers to help fix that is make sure that our policies work. Make sure that they're successful on both the environmental side and on the economic side, to where it doesn't take hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer funds that are being thrown out there to subsidize or artificially manipulate markets that's not sustainable. And so that way you can have innovators, you can have business plans in the private sector that are able to plan their investment, to plan their strategies, and deploy successful energy solutions that keep prices down while ensuring that emissions keep going down as well.
That is one of the interesting things that you see out here, because aside from the high level negotiations that happen and kind of that feel good conversation, it's otherwise sort of a trade show at this place, where with a bunch of NGOs saying a bunch of stuff. But there are some interesting things where say, private industry is coming in and showcasing certain technologies. At the U.S. pavilion, there was a number of those that I thought all of them were rather interesting. Like this sort of like carbon capture concrete or some other kind of technology. You guys sort of remember there was something about corn oil, which Mariannette probably wants to just jump all over. Being from Iowa, in Iowa we have corn. So there was
soy.
Yeah, it's just there was some really interesting stuff, and in all the roundtables that we've done, that Clear Path has been so kind to set up for us. Worth giving Clear Path a shout out, I suppose.
And Chris.
Great Crest, yeah, exactly. Worth giving them a shout out for getting us out here. There's some really interesting technologies from the roundtables, whether it's the small modular reactor nuclear, a new type of battery technology that actually doesn't use rare earths, if I understood that correctly.
Iron.
And then you can get all, and they do it all inside the United States. That was really interesting, because I've always been very skeptical of the whole battery conversation. Oh, we just have batteries, and then solar and wind, the variability problem is gone. And I'm like, well, how many batteries are you going to need here, folks? Like, a lot. And where are you going to get all that cobalt and lithium? So that was an interesting new technological push. There's just a lot, I think, that's worth being optimistic about if we let it happen.
And the other thing is that we've talked a lot about innovation, and certainly innovation is part of the Republican strategy for both energy and the environment. And so I think one of the things that came up repetitively when we met with people is to make sure that the innovations that exist, that are promoted, that are developed from our energy labs, from our private entities, that we're allowed to keep those, and they're not just taken by China, producing them cheaply and then importing them back to the United States. And so undercutting companies that take that risk, or our own energy laboratories that are developing some cutting edge technology.
Yeah, and actually that reminds me, that battery technology did come from a partnership with our national labs, which is really cool. So I think
of course we heard the problems with the World Bank.
Yeah, that was interesting.
That was interesting.
Yeah,
to hear the countries that need the development aren't going to get it because they don't meet the requirements of the World Bank.
Yeah,
which is being generated from a concept that there's one way to do climate.
Which is what happened to Sri Lanka, that we saw unfold this year.
Mm-hmm.
It was trying to meet the standards of the World Bank and the IMF.
Right.
To meet their climate standards.
It's it's to put it in terms that that especially our Breitbart readers would understand. It's the global elites coming in, telling you how to do your business, and then destroying you as a result. It does happen. Sri Lanka is a pretty good example. The Europeans did it to themselves for sure, and you've seen the African countries really speak out against this quite a bit. I think last year as well, and this year especially forcefully saying, look, we are not saying no to fossil fuels. The Japanese have said that, so Asian countries as well. I think saying you will not doom us to poverty. Okay, we need to do it our way. You need to help us with that. You need to be understanding of that. And I think that's a strong message. That the tone seemed a little different this time as a result.
More pragmatic.
A little bit more. Maybe we're going in the right direction. Maybe all these podcasts we're doing are working.
It's
definitely just
thing.
the
World
podcast.
events are pushing people to.
But it's
make-
also
it's the
at some
podcast.
point the emotional wave comes down and the realistic, realism hits the fan, and you have to deal with real facts.
I think that's hopefully true. I think we'll call it there as we go to dinner, and we're going to hear what John Kerry, a little bit more of what John Kerry has to say. Maybe we'll have a reaction to that afterwards. Thanks for being here. Thank you all for your reactions to what we've seen today, and thanks for being in the fight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Great.